to be their daily life and their normal. And it's quite interesting to see how the whole country's security is basically run by 19 years old and 20 years old. And, you know, in these, it's a bit crazy.
We were amazed at the age of the doctors. They were like, 21, 22 in the Army. See, and they even demonstrated how they handled the wounded and all this stuff.
Yeah,
I was impressed.
So, I tell you what, if you don't believe in God, come to Israel and see how these kids are keeping all of us safe, and then it must surely take a miracle and a very good God to do that, because I don't know how that would be possible anywhere else.
Well, it's like there's an old saying: there are no atheists in foxholes. So
yes.
That's how you do that. Yeah. Well, that's good to see.
Oh, yeah!
Hey,
the hat is back.
All right.
You might go ahead and start, because time is always precious. But I just want to read Audrey's bio. And Audrey, I was trying to think of how long it's been. I can take my glasses off. How long it's been. I think it's been about 10 years. Since maybe 2010 or 2011 that we've been able to connect with you a couple times a year in Jerusalem at Sha'are Tzedek. I couldn't remember exactly well. So I'm going to go ahead and read your beautiful bio. And I thought she's probably done this before, because her biography is just so wonderful. But born in Antwerp, Belgium, Audrey studied graphic design and photography, specializing in corporate design. Audrey worked in Brussels, Barcelona, and Paris before settling in London, where she set up Isha together with her business partner. They created their company specializing in nonprofit organizations. That's where Audrey got to know Sha'are Tzedek. For 10 years, Audrey created all their fundraising material aimed at the British public. 9 years ago, Audrey made Aliyah to Jerusalem with her husband and 3 children. Audrey first started to volunteer for an organization called One Family, a nonprofit organization which supports victims of terror and their families. 5 years ago, Audrey's path crossed again with Sha'are Tzedek, only this time with the mothership in Israel. Audrey's work at Sha'are Tzedek today, amongst other things, is welcoming us, their guests from all over the world, and showing them what a special place it is. Audrey lives in Jerusalem with her husband, Gino, creator of 51 Blue Emotional Optimization. Their eldest daughter, Leah, is currently serving in the IDF in the International Cooperation Division. They have a 17-year-old son and a 12-year-old daughter, and baby, the mini. So we say shalom and welcome. I'll take this off a little bit, but we're just so glad to hear from your perspective, Audrey. We miss you terribly. And with all the things that are going on, Audrey and I chatted just for a couple minutes before, and that it was March the 8th and 9th that I talked with her, because I was planning to come on the 12th. I said, Audrey, what's going on? And then she said, hey, listen, the wall is coming down. Nobody is allowed in the hospital. It's serious. So I don't think any of us would have thought it would have gone on this long, this crisis. So I really, since we're supposed to be there in a month and it doesn't look promising for us, I wanted Audrey to come to us and share what's really going on at Ground Zero in Jerusalem, at one of the most special hospitals in Jerusalem. So Audrey, without further ado.
All right. So first of all, Barry, thank you so much for keeping in touch and sending your lovely emails and words of support and just reminding us that you're thinking of us, and that I know you all do. So, we've become friends over the year, and, family, you are family abroad. So really, first of all, I have to thank you for keeping in touch, and also to tell you that all the wonderful things you bring every time you come, the volume of gifts you bring is now being appreciated even more, because we don't have it. So people start calling me from all the departments, what's happening? We don't have anything to give, blah, blah, blah. So it just shows how, how you get used to good stuff. And then when you don't have it, you appreciate it even more. So I thought it was important for you to know how it really is a game changer. All these wonderful gifts you bring, and you don't really realize that a blanket can make the difference of a young patient's experience in the NICU, in the PICU, or to the parents' family, and to the children themselves who are old enough to understand. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Now, to say what's going on in Israel, well, I'm the best proof of what's going on in Israel. I have put myself and my family in quarantine since Sunday night, as we had my niece over for Shabbat, and she was tested positive on Sunday for corona. So we are now living at home with all the family, plus two, the boyfriend of my daughter, the girlfriend of my son, who have felt that it was safer for their families to stay with us rather than being isolated alone in a room. We've been tested a few days ago negative, so thank God we are not, we haven't developed any symptoms or anything, and it doesn't look like we're going to, please God. But so far, we still have to stay into quarantine because this nasty virus could be in incubation for another 10 days. So all in all, what you should be doing if you have been in contact and you've been in contact with someone is to put yourself in isolation for 14 days to protect the people you care about and you love, and also the others that you don't know, and that you want to be a decent human being and stop this disgusting illness from spreading further. Basically, that's what you have to do. So as I told you before, I've got 2 soldiers at home, and we have set up some sort of order of how we're going to run the house. So it was quite interesting to see these 2 20-year-olds bossing us around and telling us that in the army, you have a kitchen responsible and you have a toilet responsible, and they are responsible on that day to make sure everybody's done their duties. So it was very interesting how an argument came out of that, where my daughter said, well, of course, we all equal and we all have to be on the spread chart. And then my son, who's 17, turned around to his sister and said, don't you think mom and dad shouldn't be in that list? Because really, they run the house. Dad is working, mom as well. And at the end of the day, they pay for everything. So maybe we should just not include them, and we should just really help in the house. So it was very interesting to see this dynamic coming out, which is a new experience for them to take responsibility into the communal life, I would say. Now back to the hospital. It's crazy. Jerusalem is crazy at the moment. We seem to, at the beginning of this whole business, we were pretty good. We were the best students. We closed off the airport. We closed off everything. Everyone stayed at home for a month. Nobody, Passover, Pesach was spent with the smallest guest list ever. I don't think, families have ever experienced such small Leila Seder. And then, I don't know, everything went downhill somehow. People got fed up. Businesses needed to go, back into earning money. And now it seemed to be completely unstoppable. When we went for being tested, we went to the drive-in, to the Magen David Adom drive-in, and our appointment was at 8:40 p.m. We were there on time, and after 2 hours on the clock, one lovely volunteer of MADA, Magen David Adom, came over to our car and said, listen, guys, there are at least another 50 cars in front of you. There is another drive-in center not too far. Maybe you go there and you'll be seen faster, which we did. And we indeed got taken care of within 20 minutes, we were done. But nevertheless, it just shows you the sheer volume of the amount of people who are either needing to be tested or going into quarantine. I mean, this is not a joke. It's really, really happening. Yeah. In terms of life at the hospital, it's very difficult because we have cut down on all our volunteers. We were very proud to be a system that relies on about 300 volunteers that come on a daily basis to the hospital to do all sorts of jobs that relieve the work from the nurses and the support staff, etc. And just not to have all these people is crazy. It's very hard. And in this group of volunteers, we include volunteers who come and sit and read with elderly people who don't really have family, Holocaust survivors who are by themselves, and like a whole generation of people who are completely isolated and alone. And the fact that we don't have this volunteer is very hard for everyone. I can share a little personal story of what happened to me last Thursday. I was in the office and I got called by Nina. I don't know if you remember Nina. She's the nursery teacher in the school. Yes. She's lovely. She's American. So she called me and she said, listen, we have a problem. We have a little girl here who is French. Their family moved to Israel literally 3 weeks ago. Nobody speaks French, nobody speaks Hebrew in the family. And unfortunately, she was on her way to school, first day going to year 1, and she was a bit excited and ran down the street and got run over by a car. Now, thank God she has only a few bruises and, they kept her for observation. But on Thursday morning, her grandfather, who wasn't very well, passed away, not corona related. And all the family needed to go to the cemetery and they had nobody to stay with the little girl. Now, it's policy, we don't leave children alone in the hospital, especially when they're that young and when they don't speak the language. Since we don't allow any volunteers coming from outside, we couldn't ask someone who wasn't directly related to the family to come and sit with the little girl whilst the father went for 1 hour to the cemetery. So Nina thought of me. She said, you speak French. Do you think you can come and sit with her? And I said, well, of course I'll come. And I spent a good hour with this little girl who'd never seen me in her life, who didn't even know her grandfather had passed away. She actually asked me if her grandfather was in our hospital as well. Mm-hmm. And I said, I really didn't know. I didn't want to say anything. So I said, look, I don't know your grandfather. And I'm sure your mom and dad will let you know as soon as they can. And we played and it was lovely. And she was a lovely, lovely, sweet 6-year-old who was very excited to have moved to Israel, who actually couldn't remember the accident at all. And but it's just to show you the difficulty of we don't think about those things. The fact that volunteers can't come into the hospital, it's crazy. It creates insane situations. And you can't ask a nurse that has the full ward to go and babysit a 6-year-old because she's got other things she's responsible of. So that's just in a nutshell. On a larger scale, we are obviously preparing for the winter, which we expect is going to be even more challenging because we are dealing with this illness that where symptoms resemble the regular flu. And now if we know that usually around the winter time, beginning of the winter, you do have the flu happening, how are we going to differentiate between patients? Where are we going to put all these people? Because we're going to have more and more patients coming in. So we have one of the things we've done, of course, we've built a biological emergency room outside of the hospital. It's basically in some sort of not really a tent. It doesn't, it's like a solid build that has been built on one of the external parkings directly next to the emergencies. And they have their own lab there. They have their own drive-in system for testing of corona. They have a ward where they're checking, you know, like the first stage is really the tricky one, to check who is actually carer or not, and then they get moved to wards. Now, we have built within the hospital, when this whole thing started, the way we coped was that we closed departments that were elective, like elective surgery departments, eye departments, all sorts of things that weren't urgent exactly on that moment. And we use these spaces as wards for patients that needed to be hospitalized. So we close all sorts of things. It took a lot of work of building this infrastructure, because you're basically building a hospital within a hospital, but that little hospital has to be completely separate from the main hospital. So that was quite a challenging task to do, but you know, our new Director General, Professor Offer Marine, is also a commander in the army, and he's in charge of the field hospital, which means whenever there is a tragedy in the world, he's in charge of deploying and setting up a hospital, a field hospital. So we couldn't have asked for a better person to know exactly how to run this operation. In view of preparation, or in preparation with the future expected increase on patients and questionable patients due to the flu stroke corona for the winter, we have now closed off, we closed off the dining room. We have a huge dining room for all the staff. If you think that Sha'are Tzedek has about 4,000 people on their payroll staff, you have to realize that we feed all these people, of course. So we have huge kitchens, and we also have dining room where the doctors, nurses, support staff, cleaning staff, everyone comes to have their lunches, breakfast, you know, dinner, supper, whatever. So now, due to corona, we're not sitting together anymore. You're not allowed to sit in the same room and share a meal. You have to eat by yourself. So therefore, this whole space became available, and we have taken it over and turned it into a ward. So imagine a dining room that could probably sit about 500 people at any given time has now been turned over into a giant ward, corona ward, and it's completely closed off. It has an entrance from the back of the building, as you want. So you're not going through the corridors of the main building. You can come in from outside directly through there. And so it's just to show you how really you have to think ahead, and you have to prepare for the worst, hoping for the best, and to reinvent yourself constantly. Yeah, that's the situation. Having said that, people are very careful in the hospital. The staff walks around constantly with a mask. You don't really have to tell anyone or remind anyone, hello, you're not wearing a mask, or you're not wearing it properly. I mean, people have very creative ideas on how to wear their mask. Under the nose does not count. In between, on top of your bottom lip doesn't count either, and certainly under the chin is not exactly. And on your chin is really, if you have a double chin, you don't want to show, but not so much to protect others from catching your germs. So exactly. So we have, everybody's pretty much trained, cleaning their hands, washing their hands. Alcohol gel is available everywhere, at every corner, every door, next to every hallway. You can safely clean your hands. And security, I mean, it's crazy. We have security at the entrance of, at all the entrances of the hospital. And it's very interesting how their role changes according to times and seasons. Before Passover, the security literally checks in your bags to check if you have bread or any chametz non-kosher for Pesach food, which you've been kindly asked to leave outside into the locker rooms that are being put there just before the festival. But other times, unfortunately, we have to check for bombs and knives and all sorts of things like that. And today, believe it or not, they're checking for people wearing masks. And they have a big box with masks, and whoever comes into the hospital without are being given one. And also, you should know, we don't allow people randomly in the hospital. So they check. People have to come and say, we, the staff, we have to show our badge. And other people have to say why they're coming. So if they're a patient, they have to show their invitation to the appointment. And if they're coming to visit their family member, they call the departments to check if there is already somebody there, because you only are allowed one visitor at a time. And so they'll have to wait for the person to leave for them to go in. So these are all little interesting things that have changed in the hospital. But I have to say, generally speaking, life at the hospital is happening. It's booming. I can't say it's booming, but we are trying to live in a normal way, as normal as you can. We have changed habits. We're very lucky to have, let's say, aroma. We have a very nice aroma, which is like a Starbucks, you would say, an Israeli Starbucks.
Yeah.
And we have the place, so the indoor dining space has been closed off and people are allowed to sit outside. So you have a little bit of normality that is back, and we're trying to, keep it as pleasant as could be for guests and visitors and patients. So yeah, that's in a nutshell what's been happening.
Well, now, Audrey, how would that affect, say, what we do for you? I mean, we usually bring the stuff, toys for the kids, new procedures.
So it's very, very difficult. I will tell you very honestly, every time I've gone out shopping, I mean, now we had to prepare for the beginning of the school year. So I went to buy school books and, pens, like every other parent for their children going back to school. And I bought stickers. I just bought packs and packs of stickers that I went to give in the departments because they begged me. I bought ice pops, ice lollies for the children, for the pediatric emergencies, because they're desperate. Anything, it's just so we're lacking of everything. So now we've taken it upon ourselves that every person that is involved with the children department or thinks about it, whenever they're buying something or seeing something sweet, they buy it and they just give it. But it's nothing compared to, it's like a drop in the sea compared to what you've been bringing. I mean, your gifts were so thoughtful. The blankets, I mean, I get called every day, please tell me you have something to give. And I have literally nothing to give. It's heartbreaking because the children are going in for procedures and they cry and it's painful, and now it's scary because you see people with masks and you don't really, young children, they don't really, it's bad enough to have to come to a hospital, but in these conditions it's even more scarier. So it's difficult.
And we do have somebody in Rishon LeZion. We've shipped some boxes, I think 5 to 7 boxes of stuffed animals. I didn't know if they're even allowed to drop those off to you. They're sealed in the space bags, but what is the procedure?
So obviously we know each other. We have a very long-standing relationship. I know that everything you bring to us is brand new, and then there is no problem. Everything that is new and sealed is completely fine. We bring it, we select it, we make it into small bags that go into various departments. We give it to, the ENT department and the emergency department and the surgical wards. So, yeah, we're grateful for everything. But yeah, it's
on that. That's great to know, because I know in March we couldn't, even if I had planned. So I'm glad to know that, because I have a bunch of questions. But what were your niece's symptoms?
Sorry, what are?
What were the symptoms of your family member that has COVID?
So my niece came to us for Shabbat. She came on Friday, just before Shabbat, and she said she was just tired. She had a busy week, and she's also she's a physiotherapist and works with young children. And she has a hobby. She loves dancing hip hop, so she dances a lot, and she turned out to have danced quite a bit on last week. So she said, yes, I have a bit of aches and pains, but I'm sure maybe I overdid it with the dancing. So nothing. Listen, end of the week, Friday, everybody's exhausted. So we said, okay, just go have a we'll have a meal, you'll go, you'll sleep, and we'll see tomorrow how you feel. The next day she was still a bit funny, not quite right. She had no temperature. We checked her temperature. She had no temperature, no other symptoms. She wasn't coughing. She wasn't feeling anything apart this little fatigue and, slight aches and pains, really. After Shabbat, she went back to Tel Aviv. That's where she lives. And we said to her, maybe you should go check, because today we don't know. So indeed, she stayed home, and the next day she had a test and it came back positive. Since she's now just lost a sense of smell and taste, but she still doesn't have temperature. She's not feeling terribly sick or anything like that. She's also young and in good shape. So, it doesn't affect her full blown. But nevertheless, my parents were there. My parents are in their 70s, and we were very, very worried for them. They got tested yesterday as well, and it came back negative. So we're very relieved. But it could just have equally gone a completely different direction. So if you do experience any slight thing that is out of the usual, I would say don't go. Don't mix with people you love or with anyone else, because it's not fair. And she felt terribly guilty. She cried and she said, I'm so sorry. I've put you all at risk and I feel terrible. She feels worse by having put us at risk than from her symptoms. So I said, look, nothing we can do about it. We just have to be, cleverer next time. And if you feel any slight something, even if it's nothing, stay home.
Well, yeah. And see, over here in the States, it depends on which state has done what. Now, I think it's South Dakota. The governor said, no, we're not going to wear masks all the time. You just keep your distance, wash your hands, It takes on a different form here in the States because we feel it's been bungled, very much so. And we've had worse than this in our nation's history. And there's a lot of, a lot of thinking that this could be some kind of political maneuver because it's an election year. The funny thing was, and you met my cousin Rochelle, I believe. Yeah.
Sure.
I just did a painting video for her. You ought to see it. Anyway, she and I were both talking after the lockdown happened here. We said, our life hasn't really changed all that much because I don't go to work. I went to visit my elderly mom and dad, and so we're in a pretty safe area, at least in the Kansas City area, on the Kansas side. But so it's a different dynamic here in the States than maybe in Israel. Yeah.
And, about the grocery store, because we have great big groceries, but initially in Israel, we saw the food lines and everything. And especially now that you're in quarantine, how do you deal with that issue?
So I became modern and I did an online shopping. It was quite challenging because everything was in Hebrew. And although I read and write Hebrew, it's not my first or second or third language. So it's a bit, it took me a good hour and a half. And when I go to the stores, I buy, if I want 5 apples, I pick 5 apples. I don't know how much it weighs and how many grams of kilos we're talking about. I know I had 5. So my order this morning, I'm a bit embarrassed to say, I thought I ordered something like 5 or 6 red peppers, and I ended with something like 25.
Oh, a lot of
So now, so you know, another thing, I wanted to buy something very simple like toilet paper, and I ended up with kitchen roll. So but apart from those two, those things,
both are useful but hardly interchangeable.
yes, yes. Apart from those few things, I have to say, you know, we did an order and we've got food, and it's not fancy food. It's just like the everyday type of things you need. We're at home. We're going to bake and cook and make nice things. And it's just, you know, you have to make do with what you have. Yes, I don't have my special little, you know, barista milk that I like, but okay. You know what? We're talking about 2 weeks. It's not the end of the day. It's not the end of the world. There's still stuff to be bought. The shops, there's no queuing anymore. The queuing happened when they just opened the shops again. Well, actually, when people were allowed out to go shopping, and the queuing happened because they didn't want to allow more than X amount of people in the stores. So now there is no restrictions in the amount of people in the store, but they do check your temperature, and you do have to wear a mask when you go into the shops. So actually in Israel, you do have to wear a mask pretty much everywhere in every public space, except when you go to the sea, because of the air, you know, it just like circulates. So whenever you are in a place where the air circulates quite nicely, then you are less at risk of catching anything. So, but having said that, again, you have, and I think it's the same everywhere in the world. You have a group of people that don't feel very much that it's their problem, you know. And I'm thinking about the age bracket between 16 to, I'd say, 30, because they don't, you know, they don't carry the responsibility of their grandparents. Their parents are probably in their 40s to 60s, and therefore they're not really in the very high risk group. And therefore these youngsters think, you know, if we're going to get it, whatever, we'll get over it. It's not such a big deal. And they'll get it in a lighter version anyway, unless they have asthma or any other, you know, risk factors. But otherwise, they're just like, why should we stop our lives? I mean, we're studying, and our life has already been put on hold. We can't go to university. We can't find jobs. We can't be interns anywhere. So whatever, you know, they've already messed it up for us. So let's party and have a good time and carry on. So
what about,
I guess it's,
what about Rosh Hashanah? I mean, here in America, people go to the synagogue. So if you're in quarantine, you're at home, yes?
So we're at home. Having said that, I mean, synagogue, you mentioned synagogue. Synagogue has been happening. It's actually quite beautiful, because the synagogue the praying has been happening outdoors now. So you have people who are very responsible, and who take out X numbers of chairs that they're allowed to have, because you have to measure your outdoor space and keep about 2 meter distance between people. So they sort of drawn sort of blocks on the floor, like lines. And within these lines, they've put a chair, and they said, where there's a chair, there's allowed to be one person. And whoever doesn't fit in this grid, you know, can't come. So people are very respectful of that. There's been a lot of negative talk about the ultra-Orthodox community, where unfortunately it spread very fast, and it had a very high number of sick people. The reason for that is that people don't realize that in an ultra-Orthodox family, let's take a basic ultra-Orthodox family where they would have a family of maybe 10. Okay, they might have 8 children, just picking a number as an average. In a family of 8, by the time your children are a bit older, they get sent to yeshiva, to a Torah learning school. Basically, it's like going to boarding school. So if you do have a family with 8 children, you might not have all 8 living at home at the same time. You might have 4 living at home. And usually these families have, and by the time these children finish their boarding school, the others are in boarding school and they start getting married. So you really never have all of these people living at home at the same time. And therefore, they don't own large properties. The vast majority of them live in very small apartments, a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment where the children share. So when you have all these people being forced to being back at home all together, if you have one person that is sick, your whole building gets sick. Wow. So that's the problem, that's the issue, and that is where the spreading happened so fast. It wasn't because they behaved better or worse than a family in Tel Aviv, but the family in Tel Aviv might only have 2 children and might have more space in their living accommodation. So people, misjudged and became very angry and disrespectful, but then they didn't look at the other side of the coin where, youngsters were still partying in Tel Aviv together and, without social distancing and without masks, etc. So that's also a very important factor in why things spread so fast. So as far as I'm aware at the moment, we're talking about Rosh Hashanah, if at all, allowing people in synagogues. Again, very small numbers of people. I think if it's outside, it's something like 50. And if it's inside, it's maybe 20 people. They might do a rota saying that, okay, you will have to book to come to your prayer session. You will have a first session starting at 6 o'clock in the morning until 8, and then the next, and then the next. This might be something that some synagogues might apply, or just, like I've seen in other places, like we've done for Passover, you go on your balcony and you pray together. That's also a possibility. But so far, it looks like it's going to be like that. At the moment, I've also heard of closing down, of imposing a curfew from 7 p.m. in the red cities. So we're sort of being now categorized like a traffic light. Red zone is really bad, so people should stay at home. You can't travel from one home to another, etc. So Jerusalem is for sure. Also, in Jerusalem, it hasn't been categorized as one package deal of a red zone. You have within Jerusalem neighborhoods that are being highlighted as more problematic than others, and that's based on the amount of patients and people in quarantine. So at the moment, that's how they're trying to divide the system. All in all, it's a good system if people respect it.
It sounds like they're like, so if you want to go to synagogue, then you have to make an appointment. We have that with the banks here too. You can't go in, but we do have drive-through. So, and a lot of congregations like mine, for example, we have a section for social distancing. The World Health Organization says, okay, now 3 feet. But in Kansas, we're like 6 feet. But then we have for non-mask wearers and, things like that.
It's actually like crazy. It sounds like a smoking and non-smoking zone.
Yeah, that's it.
It's a bit insane. But...
Audrey, and then I'm going to be quiet after I ask this last question. What about vaccines? What's going on over there?
So it's a big race against the time, I guess. Everybody, every university, even high tech companies have tried to come in from their industry, trying to bring some sort of advanced thinking and helping to advance the question. Honestly, I know as much as you guys about where we stand with vaccines. I know that everybody is looking, and so far, well, nothing new on the market. But one thing that is very interesting about the hospital, and that started very much very early on in the whole corona business, the hospital opened, well, not opened, because we have a research, you know, that we're a teaching hospital, and sharing knowledge and passing knowledge on to the next generation is part of our essence, really. So very early on, the research committee has opened up a whole platform and urged anyone to come forward with all sorts of research connected to corona. Doesn't need, it wasn't specifically to look for a cure or to a vaccine or anything like that, but it was also to understand how it affected other general issues. So for example, if you are, we found that we had fewer people coming in during the quarantine, during the house arrest, fewer people coming in with heart attacks. So they started to ask the question, well, how can corona affect not having heart attacks? Well, obviously you barely had anyone on the roads, you barely had anyone going at work, and therefore you have a much calmer lifestyle. You're at home, you don't have to rush, you know, your lifestyle changes, and therefore it affects the illnesses that we see arriving to the hospital. We had fewer strokes, we had fewer heart attacks. Of course, we barely had any car accidents, which is quite an interesting finding. So the hospital very early on asked these questions. What have you found in your department change? And it's fascinating because although it's not directly connected to the illness itself, it's a direct result of what this situation creates. So that was quite an interesting findings. And like that, there are many other departments that have broad stories like that and that are doing research. And even more so, they've now pushed for departments that really don't have anything in common or don't have very much to do with each other at regular times to be allowed to have grants, receiving grants for them to work together if they're finding that they share interests. So the way the platform works, they actually build an internet platform for whoever wants to start a research. They've said, if you have, let's say, a physiotherapist interested in researching anything to do with rehabilitation for the heart, and you have a heart specialist that wants to write about, I don't know, breathing, and a pulmonologist that has been asked to join them, they will actually be allowed to share that platform and receive a grant to do research, the three of them together, although they're not part of the same department, and they don't have to fundraise and get their own funds to do that research. And they will be allowed to access all the other findings from all the other platforms looking for working on different projects. So that's quite interesting and very nice to see that it has promoted the urge of finding out and learning and share information and experiences. So
Nice.
Some good is coming out.
Another question, because we love going in there because we see Jewish people, Arab people, secular. And so Bethlehem was one of the first cities to close, yeah. I remember. And so what is the situation now? Are you seeing as many diverse nationalities coming in?
Look, don't forget that Jerusalem is, as a city, is already a very diverse city. So you don't have to come from outside of Jerusalem, of what is considered outside, like a place like Bethlehem, to be to not be a part of Jerusalem. Our demographics haven't changed. We still have the same groups of people coming in. On the contrary, I think we see that more and more people from Arab communities would prefer to come to Sha'are Tzedek, which is considered like a Jewish hospital, because they trust that they will be looked after properly. Unfortunately, there have been many stories of budget not getting to the right places and them not getting the right assistance and enough care. So definitely this would never ever change under no circumstances. Wars and terror attacks haven't managed to change that attitude, and this virus certainly won't do any change to how we service our community. And our community is everyone who lives in Jerusalem and around Jerusalem, no matter what they believe, who they are. So that hasn't changed at all.
Okay. I mean, I keep having questions, even
Go
about,
ahead.
we really appreciate it because we see what's going on here, but on your end, what about the IDF? Because they're in close quarters too. So, and this is one of those times where I have not heard about skirmishes, like rockets coming over, as many as before. Could you share with us the perspective regarding the IDF and the virus?
So until a few weeks ago, until actually a week or two ago, we had on a regular basis, probably on a daily basis, balloons, these bombs, balloons coming from the Gaza border, from the Gaza Strip into Jerusalem, and creating a lot of problems. It's not targeting killing people, but it's targeting burning fields and crops and huge deficit for farmers and farmland around. So although it wasn't a direct rocket sent at people, even though there were a few as well, it's completely destroying the livelihood of families, etc. And we've had, of course, quite a few issues at the Lebanon border and at the Syrian border. So people had to go in the north of the country, they had to go and stay indoors and going to shelters for a few hours, and some of them for a few days, because there was problem. We came very close to a near war when there were terrorists that walked through the Syrian border. We had 4 terrorists who walked in, and that created quite a chaos. And then, of course, you had issues with Lebanon that started also another problem. So it's never quiet. Yeah. There were still terrorist attacks. There was a terror attack 2 days ago in Ariel, where a man just walked in with a knife and tried to attack soldiers. He was arrested, but this, unfortunately, this is some people with all of that. And it was very funny. Well, funny. It's not funny, but it's quite ironic, because I saw a picture of this guy who was arrested. You see, he carried a knife and he was stripped. After he was stopped, he was stripped just to make sure he didn't wear anything else. So he was left with his underwear and a t-shirt and his mask. So he did think of wearing a mask, but
yes,
very interesting.
Yes. Okay, now I'm going to be quiet and let others ask. And if not, I'll keep asking questions.
Hey, I'll ask a question.
Okay, go. Hi, Pam.
Sorry I was late. I'm a little challenged and I'm out in my car. I was out and about in the city, or in the area where I live, so excuse me for being late. But Audrey, my name is Pam, and I live in Northern California. And I was wondering, like, I don't know if this is still true or not, but, or if it ever was true. Is it the case that if somebody actually knows they've had this coronavirus, you know, in their system, whether it affected them adversely or not. Is it the case that once you get it, you won't have an effect from it again?
Nope.
Does anybody know? I was kind of wondering
It's
if Israel is so, you know, like, you know, the lower number population for a nation state, is there the possibility that maybe Israel will all be immunized? You know what I'm saying? Or, you know, many people will be kind of immune to it after they've actually had it.
So it's a very good question. And until not very long, we didn't have the answer for that, because of course, in order to know the answer, you have to have enough time going by and
Yes.
people, you know, to see if people get reinfected or not. But as it's, as well, a few weeks ago, a few months ago, we thought that it was probably like when you get you know, any other disease, you might get it again, but a lighter, just a lighter version of it. And some people wouldn't get it again. But as it turns out now, we see people being reinfected for a second time. So, you know, people that were infected at the real beginning of this whole business, 5 months later, again, are being infected by their children because they thought they couldn't get it again. So unfortunately, no.
Does it show any signs that maybe it's a little less harsh if they, you know that they are having it again for another, you know, another time, whether it's second or third or whatever? Does it show signs of lessening and the adverse effects?
So again, it's very early days to be able to make a statement. Like, there hasn't been enough research, and it's also, you know, at the moment you also don't have enough people that have been reinfected for a second time. So a third, fourth, we don't even know that. It's way too early in the game. No, we don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know if we knew that or not. It's just a question that came to me. So thank you.
It's a very good question. And they do think that with children, that younger children, it's also the reason why the fewer of them get it is because they're already in an age where their bodies are working constantly to fight infections. So therefore children, because their body is already in that fight mode of not getting infections from being with other children and getting all the other children diseases, that's probably why their immune system is better prepared than ours. But apart from that, we really don't have very much information. Every day you have more and more people doing research. So yeah, time will tell.
Audrey, how has your job changed? I mean, did you work at home first and then go into the hospital? I know now you're quarantined. Are you working online, or how has that changed?
So really, at the beginning, we were Sharon and I, you know Sharon, we were both sent home, basically. We were sent home for a month without salaries. The hospital had to cut because, you know, we couldn't cope. And the people who were not absolutely necessary were sent home because we didn't want to have extra people walking around the corridors who didn't really needed to be there. So we received a month off, which was quite nice, I have to admit. We were at home with our families, and thank God we were all in good health. So I can't really complain. I can't say this was a horrible time. On the contrary, it had something quite magical, being at home with your children and your husband, and nobody had to run anywhere. It was quite nice. After a month, because, you know, Audrey, you know, our boss, really fought for us and said, you know, that's not the idea. We want you have to make a living as well, and we want you. And so obviously no groups were allowed. So that's basically my work. So he said, okay, well, come back and we'll find you something to do. So we came back, and for 2 weeks we were attached to the department that deals with infectious diseases. And they asked us to walk around the hospital all day through every single department and make sure staff wear masks properly. So we were taught exactly how to wear the mask, what's the inside, what's the outside of the mask, you know, again, above your nose and etc. And we were just walking around the hospital for 2 weeks, non-stop, reminding people, please wear your mask, please don't eat together, just like really policing. We called ourselves the mask police for a while. It was not a very nice job to do, I have to be honest. And then as things started to go back into more of a, people got used to the situation, so we didn't have to do that anymore. Whenever we walked around, we realized that 98% of the staff were doing what they were supposed to do, and the 2% were always the same 2%. So we passed that on to the management, and then they took over for, you know, about that. And as you read in my bio at the beginning, I started off as a graphic designer. So, and I did 10 years of work for Sha'are Tzedek in the UK. So I sort of was asked if I would like to work on a graphic design project. And since we are preparing next year for the 120 years anniversary of the hospital, we are working on a book. We had one, you remember I gave you one of those books. Do you remember the 110 years? So now I'm working on the 120 years version of that book, and it's quite time consuming. I've had the pleasure of diving into the, in Yiddish you say the kishkas, which is really the insides of the hospital. And I found unbelievable material, photographs from over 100 years ago of operating theaters, of patients, of everything you can possibly imagine. And I'm looking, you know, I'm putting together, together with Sharon's help, we're working together on this project, and we are putting together amazing photos of today. We go with the camera, we set up, you know, whatever we need, we take pictures, and I do the layout. So I'm very much involved with that now. So it gives me quite a lot to do. Of course, in between, I've got other things. We've organized a series of 4 Zooms over the summer. It was Sunday, it was for our foreign officers. So for them to use as material to send to their donors and people who might be interested. So I had to organize this from scratch. I found speakers who I thought had interesting subjects to talk about in relation to Corona. So I had one speaker, for example. Of course, the first speaker was Professor Halevi, who's now the president of the hospital, who's been Director General for 31 years. He gave an update of what's going on in the hospital. Another week, we had nurse from the biological emergencies, which is basically the Corona unit, the Corona emergency department. And that was quite informative as well, from a nurse perspective, working with these outfits in 38 degrees Celsius. I don't know how much it is in Fahrenheit, but very, very hot. You know, how it feels for them to be in a room when a patient is dying and you can't bring in their family members, and it's just heartbreaking because you just have to accompany them in their last moment. And it's just, it's really, really terrible. So she was telling us about her experience. We've had Dr. Giora Weiser, who is the head of the pediatric emergency department. Again, he was telling us how it is from his perspective. Because of Corona, people are, you know, thinking twice after coming to the hospital for emergencies with their children. So instead of having a patient with an appendicitis coming in very early on, they come 2-3 days later when the appendix has burst and it turns into a complicated surgery with 3, 4, 5 day stays in the hospital instead of in and out thing. Within the next day you're out. And so, yes, he was explaining how, you know, thinking twice about coming when you have an emergency. Also, the type of injuries that he sees now, because many more children were stuck at home, they were bold. So little children jumping off the sofas, breaking their arms, cutting, you know, having cuts, things like that. Because, you know, you have children at home and children will be children and they need activity and they need to move. And so when they do that indoors in small spaces, it's not always recommended. So he was telling us about that. And then we had also Dr. Chen Sela, who is in charge of our maternity D department, which he's a gynecologist, OBGYN. And he was telling us how it is to deliver with a patient that is either in quarantine or a patient that has corona. Because these ladies who are pregnant and who need to give birth, well, will have to give birth regardless of their status with corona. So he was explaining how that happened. And if you have a C-section, how you have to organize that business. I mean, it was very interesting. So, you know, organizing that type of things. People were contacting me like yourself, Barry, and asking me how it's going. We have many offices around the world that do fundraising for us. So we have to constantly make sure they receive photographs, information, that we share the stories like the ones I told you, so that they keep in touch with us and they know what's going on. It's like actually calling your family or your cousin abroad and saying what's going on in your house. So that's what we've been trying to do as best as we could.
Now I'm going to be quiet. Anyone else have anything you'd like to ask Audrey? I mean, I just think it's so interesting because we're, 12 hours away, or, distance-wise in a plane, and 8 time zones in the central United States to Israel. And yet there's so many parallels. Yeah. So many parallels with what you're doing and what we're having to do. And we don't know. It's one thing when you go through difficulty, but it's another thing when you don't know where the end is.
Yes.
And this has been a challenge. But you bottom line it and say, we're healthy. And that's the great thing. There's all different, there's various ages on this call. And I also forward it over to Facebook Live, and I've seen things on people there. It's just very interesting to know, and all we can do is just hope and pray that we'll get to see you. I'm hoping, by when Pesach is over. I mean, who would have thought? Who would have thought?
Somebody was even saying that, wow, Pesach during a plague. Interesting.
Very much so.
We never would have thought.
Well, now, Audrey, are there what's the future now? I mean, what's going on with, say, next year? Do they have any plans for next year, or is it just going to continue the way it is, or what?
Look, it's impossible. You have another saying in Yiddish that says, man plans and God laughs.
Yeah.
At the moment, God's having a good laugh. It's impossible to plan ahead. I mean, even for schools, they were deliberating if opening schools or not. We only knew for sure that children were going to go back to school 2 days before. So it's, nobody has an answer. And I think that every country is trying very hard to find a solution that works for their country and for their people. Of course, in the US, you don't have these strict rules and regulations and businesses that closes and etc. But then on the other hand, your economy hasn't suffered from it as much as ours. So you have to bear in mind that when you close businesses and when you force people to stay at home, people don't have an income. And, you know, we've had suicides. I mean, you have to you have to say the truth and look truthfully. But having said that, all in all, and we have to compare with countries about the same size as ours in population and size. So I take Belgium. First of all, that's where I come from. And second, it has about the same sort of number of population and the same sort of size of land. And therefore, you know, we compare. At the moment, we have just over 1,000 people lost, which is terrible. It's really, really, it's 1,000 too many. But it's still 10 times less than what Belgium had. So although things have quite down there, you know, we still have way less human life loss. I have a very close friend of mine who lives in Miami, and she was telling me they had that amount a day. They had thousands of people dying a day. Yeah. So, you know, we are trying very hard to not have life, you know, losses, because you know the value of life in Israel is prior to everything. So at the moment, I think that is the focus, that will remain the focus, and we will try to. I think the government is trying to do the best they can. Not everybody agrees. It's hard, but I think it's the same, and it's true for every country and every state and every area. And having said that, I mean, look, within all this craziness, we've managed to have a peace situation with a country we never even imagined.
Amazing.
And
yes.
So, wow.
Well, you know, you remember.
Thank God.
Well, you remember in October, I brought, there's a lady and her granddaughter, Josie, the little gal, and yeah. Yes. Her stepdad has a restaurant in Buckner, Missouri, and when this lockdown happened, oh man, he was trying to say, he and the boss were trying to save it, and he just told me just recently they finally reopened the dining area and they have social distancing and stuff. But the funny thing is, he says, "Man, we're making money hand over fist on takeout, $4,000."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then that's happened to what has there been a lot of takeout in Jerusalem?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you should see the amount of people that set up. I can tell you another story. I have a very good friend who was working in a very nice hotel, in the Mamila Hotel, and she was an event planner. She started working there about 6 to 8 months before Corona happened, before it hit us in Israel, and she was sent home. Basically, there were no events, there were no parties, nothing to be planned, and she was one of the newcomers. So she was basically, you know, sent home. She was petrified how she's going to make an income. She's divorced and a single mother now, and she didn't know what was going to happen with her. And we were all stuck at home, and she started doing macrame, and she started to develop that. And now she's set up an online business where she sells amazing bags and key rings and bracelets and necklace and wall decorations and table things. And she's found a whole new passion. And she says to me, you know, look at me, I'm living in my shorts and t-shirt, and I had to be fully groomed every day to go to work with my heels and my nails done, and I don't regret that. I found my passion. So, you know, it's important to stay positive, and it's important to count your blessings and be grateful for what you do have. And, you know, it's challenging times for all of us, but I think that if you put a smile on your face and you're trying to, you know, be positive and you're grateful, you know, we'll get through this. We don't have a choice anyway.
Yes.
Well, the streets have been less busy, you know, and the traffic's been a lot easier to negotiate. But the one thing I've found out is that I do miss the interaction, you know. And one of the gals at the shul, she comes up to me, she said, "I'm sorry, but I'm going to break a law. I'm tired of this." So she gives me a big hug. And that's okay. I mean, you know, we're not too scared of that as long as we maintain our distance. But I do miss coming to Israel. Oh boy, do I miss it. Yeah.
And we miss
I
you.
miss
You
you
have
too,
no
yeah.
idea. Look,
Miss you
it's
too.
terrible.
Not
I
to see
spend,
me all the time.
of course, I used to spend my days walking through the departments and seeing patients and, the chronic patients. There's one little girl, you remember, Rimaz. Oh, actually, I have to give you the good news. Rimaz, you remember in the pediatric dialysis unit?
Yeah.
Just beginning of April, they found a donor for her. They found a match. So she had a kidney transplant, and thank God she's doing really well. But I haven't seen her in ages. And every time I see the nurse who looks after her, I tell her, just give her my love. Tell her I haven't forgotten about her. So it's very sad. We I miss you guys. I miss the nurses. I miss the departments. Sometimes, now with this new hairdo, I go into the corridors with my mask and people don't even say hi to me anymore because they don't recognize me.
You in that. I have to look at your eyes and go, wait a minute, that's got to be it. No, that's not.
It's still me.
Why be gray? You're not even the age to have gray. Come on.
Well, look, hey.
Oh, well, okay. I got plenty of
natural.
gray if you want some. I'm not using it.
Well, we are excited about the UAE Israel agreement. It was just so far beyond any comprehension. And then we'll stop after this. But is it fairly warmly welcomed in Israel that you know?
Oh my God! People are talking about traveling to Dubai. I'm sure this is going to be the next destination, the next #1 destination for Israelis.
Yes.
Dubai, be warned. Yes, people are very happy. Look, at the end of the day, we want peace. We want to work with, these are our neighbors. You have to realize for us to fly to Dubai is a 3-hour flight. It's next door.
Yes.
It's like you flying to New York or to Miami or to LA or whatever. We don't have anywhere to fly in the region. Everyone, anyone who wants to go anywhere would have to fly to Europe or further away. For us, it's amazing. I grew up in Belgium. We used to take the car to drive to Holland or to drive to Switzerland or to France or to Germany. I would love to be able to hop on a train and go to Beirut for a weekend. I would love that. It used to be the place to go, 70, 80 years ago. And it's a shame we're missing out. I'd love to go take my car and drive for a few hours and go to Egypt or to Jordan. Yeah. So yes, we really, really hope that one day we'll be able to do that. It'd be amazing. It'd be fantastic.
Oh man. Well, does anyone have any more questions? Because I think it's 8:00 for Audrey. And
no, but thank you.
We know that you are in our future, Audrey, and may God protect you, keep you safe, healthy, and it's just a great blessing to see you. And thank you, because again, it's at night there, and I had to say, well, 3:00 in the afternoon, Israel, 7:00 in Dallas, and it's going to be hard to get people to call. So we love you.
Thank you.
I don't know how to say it in Hebrew, but we continued.
Thank you. Thank you all. I miss you so much. You're really like my cousins from across the pond. And thank you for, staying in touch. And of course, anytime you want to have another Zoom like that, at this time of the day, night, whatever, with pleasure, because your family and, we miss you guys and we appreciate you now even more. I love the hat. Thank you, Barry. Thank you all of you. Be well, be safe, be healthy, and see you soon. Shana Tova.
Shalom,
Shana Tova. Yay. Thank you, beautiful Barry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Audrey. Good to see you.